Hello and welcome to Hillstrong OT Cyber Chats, the podcast where we spotlight the people and ideas driving progress in operational technology cybersecurity. Each episode, our host, Hillstrong's own CEO, Roger Hill, sits down with fellow industry experts to share real-world insights, practical strategies, and the lessons they've learned through years of experience. If you're looking for grounded conversations that go beyond the buzzwords and into what actually works, well, you're in the right place. Hope you enjoy.
Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm glad you could join us. So today, I think this is going to be a real interesting one today. So get ready for some storytelling. We have with us Daniel. So Daniel has been around this OT security space a long time. So Daniel, let me ask you to introduce yourself, but also think about, as you're introducing yourself, I think it's interesting to think about what has your journey been in terms of OT security and parts of that journey, how it may have changed how you view certain solutions.
Excellent. So Daniel Ehrenreich, SCC, Secure Communication Control Experts. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I started about 45 years ago as engineer, as many of us, and in 1991, I joined Motorola SCADA Solutions, the famous Moscad and Ace and Intrac, that those chaps who remember these names of product. I spent in Motorola about 20 years until 2020. In 2021, it was an interesting moment. I joined Siemens, Siemens Energy for purpose of upgrading power plant. It was excellent timing. It was exactly after the Stuxnet event, which happened in May 2010. So everybody was required to learn quickly cybersecurity. And it was a perfect time. I spent in Siemens about 3 years conducting a power plant assessment and upgrades to stronger cybersecurity. It was very interesting for power plants in Israel, small ones, big ones. Then I joined the data diode company, the Waterfall Security, where I spent just about 1 year, and I brought already a lot of knowledge in the area of industrial control systems and cybersecurity. And in 2015, I decided that it's time to share my knowledge with people, and I started to do consulting and training. In 2016, I established the ICS CyberSec, which is the annual conference in Israel, focusing primarily on cybersecurity. And since that, I'm active doing consulting, assessment, robotics, power plant, water, chemicals, different plants, but mostly I like to do training because I feel that because of the huge shortage of experts in the area of industrial control systems, cybersecurity, I bring the most value. So that's what I'm doing, and it's my pleasure to do it every day.
That is quite the journey, Daniel. I appreciate that background, and I'm kind of curious, in that time span where you've started that journey, specifically on the security side, how have some of your influences or conclusions about security for industrial control systems changed with that journey that you've had?
So it's very interesting because from the very moment I realized that there are IT people who know cybersecurity, there are OT people who know the control but know nothing about cybersecurity, and I exposed myself to this big difference between them. And about 10 years ago, I published a paper when IT and OT cybersecurity experts will drink coffee together. I ended that paper never, and that's the way it should be. Some people complained about it. Then I said, okay, drink coffee together, but don't allow your opinion to influence the other people's opinion, because IT and OT in the cybersecurity area are very much different. As things evolved, I started to see, first of all, many vendors are coming. In Israel, about 5 IDS companies started with young people who didn't have the knowledge, and I had to help all those people to understand what they are doing, the young startup companies, explain them what is important, what is not important. Then I started to see vendors starting to speak about IT/OT conversions, and I'm known by the experts who is fighting this term. I said, never say IT/OT convergence. And as part of my activity with the ISA 62443 committees, I managed to convince some colleagues, let's help to people adopt a new term, secured IT/OT interfacing, and I think it's nicely coming. So I brought my influence to that area. Another area where I started to see problems is the definition of the IT people always say confidential, integrity, availability. Then big companies started to rotate the letters, which I didn't like. So I said I must bring a term, and I brought to the industry a term, SRP, safety, reliability, performance. And people called me from around the world, Daniel, why we are typing SRP? It's always coming to you all the time. I said, yes, because I published many papers about it. So I really like to bring the influence, the correct thinking. Even this morning, I had a training session where I had to correct the thinking of people, how to view the term industrial cybersecurity correctly, about the types of attacks that happen. So that's what I really am trying to do, and I bring my knowledge, I share my knowledge. Everybody who is coming to my training program receive all the slides, up to 500 slides in Rabat in Morocco. I delivered everything because I really want people acquire that knowledge.
So I definitely know where you're coming from with some of the terminology, and maybe a little bit about my personal journey. I think just emerging, in that post Stuxnet world, and I was still with Siemens at the time. I remember the first time I heard the term OT. I'm like, what's that? And I was told, well, that's what you are, an operational technology. Never even heard that term. I never liked the term. And then I remember when we had the term IoT, and that it's amazing how some of the terminology wars, if you will get started. And I thought the IoT term, which originated out of GE, out of a PowerPoint presentation, but it took hold. It's almost like in today's terms, it went viral, right? And one of the things that I've learned in my personal journey, at least for myself, is I gave up fighting the battles of what we call something, because if the masses understand something based upon a certain term, just go with it. For myself, I just quit fighting those battles, because that's not what's important. What's important is the substance, and the substance is built around strategy and tactical execution. So I guess what I would say, what I've learned to do is to be a little more flexible in my approaches, because when, in that post-Stuxnet world, I really came out with, this is the way things are. You don't understand this industrial space. And I remember there was a very large enterprise security vendor that I'll go ahead and mention. McAfee back in the day, right? We were starting to do some things with McAfee. And working with a lot of the executives there, how I use the Purdue model, I don't like using the Purdue model for security. How I personally use the Purdue model is just simply as a common language platform between OT and IT. That's the most
Excellent.
useful representation of what the Purdue model was all about, right? So being able to really quickly whiteboard for the executives and show them, okay, this is the separation from the carpet and the concrete. This is the industrial DMZ 3.5. This is our process control network. These are the type of systems you see here. The speed of processing of information, what types of information. Then below that is our control system network, and talking through these are the type of components that live in that control layer. And then your field device network, right? And by talking about these at a component level, the speed of processing, the types of information, it became that common language. And all of a sudden we could converse much more efficiently, because they started using the terms, 3.0 and level 2 and, that sort of thing. So I think it really helped bridge that common language definition. But somewhere along the way, Daniel, I'd like to get your perspective on this, but it's like the Purdue model started as, hey, let's just use this as a reference model, just to have a conversation as a starting point. But somehow it's almost been used as synonymous with security. It's not what it is, but I'd like to get
Yes. Yes, actually, today one of the participants said, we read the Purdue model is old, it's dead, and I said, oh, let's correct that statement, because we are not designing a new plant according to the Purdue model. We are designing the plant according to what we understand is the process, how the process should be controlled, how the data flow is operated across the different zones of the plant. When we are completing it, then we will prepare a specific type of Purdue model, because fact of life, if you go to Google and type Purdue model JPEG, you receive instantly about 10 different pictures. Usually 0, 1, and 2 are okay. Usually 4 and 5 are okay. But in between, you see 2.5, 3.5, 3.5. So, and I said, remember, this is correct, because some people, and I respect them, decided to design a plant, a new plant, according to what they understand. So the goal is that when you complete the Purdue model, you must assure that all the boxes that are installed have a certain color of the Purdue model. You not leave out any box. You said, I don't know where it belongs. If you are not happy with layer 2, you can define a 2.5. It's okay, and so on. So I do believe it's important.
I can see why you'd have that perspective. I might view things a little bit different on the model. My personal opinion is the Purdue model is just simply a reference. That's all.
Yes.
I've spent a long time in a lot of different industrial verticals, and I think for the most part, I would have to say greater than 80%, there's no model there. And that's not how systems are designed. In terms of, I think there's some fundamental of control network, and that can have a broad meaning in a lot of different industrial settings, combining what we would typically think of the process control network and control system network. I think that's one of the challenges. So I think one of the, I guess for me personally, Daniel, is just thinking about, it's interesting when we're talking about a reference that can actually be a good way to talk about things from a functionality and a component mission perspective, right? What's really interesting, though, is if we think about what are the emerging trends of technology innovation that, and not even from the security perspective, from the OEMs themselves, from the Siemens and Rockwell Automations and Emerson's of the world. What are those trends that are making it much more challenging or disrupting really the data flows as we consider them today?
Yeah, so yeah, I think that what you do is very correct. Just one word about the IoT that you mentioned, and I believe that about 35 years ago, Motorola Israel did an IoT project in Las Vegas. And what they did, they said, okay, let's put a sensor to the vending machines and monitor how many cans of each type I purchased at which day of the hour. Bring this information. We know what should be the stock level on each day or each part of the day. I said, wow, that's IoT. We just didn't know how to call it, but this was a perfect IoT project conducted with Motorola SCADA components.
It's just IoT is a creative name, a creative label. And I agree. It's so interesting how now there's almost these discussions from almost like a standard or regulatory type of the definitions. But what's really interesting when you look at the origins of some of the common terms we use today, when you look at the reality of it started from a PowerPoint presentation, not from a technical research. It's like, come on, folks, let's just kind of agree on whatever that definition is. And that's where, honestly, Daniel, I gave up the fight. I gave up the battling. And because for myself, I realized, you know what, it doesn't matter. If the world wants to understand a definition of IoT, great. If we want to think of a certain subset under IoT as industrial IoT, great. Let's work within that constraints.
I tell you, I have just a minor problem with that, because when you and I are talking about different terms, probably in 1 second we understand what we are talking about. But when you bring this to the 99% of the community who are not experts, and they have their own understanding, the result will be incorrectly designed architectures, systems that cannot be protected, and this is the problem. Then people say, wow, we get a cyber attack. Why we got a cyber attack? Because our system was not correctly designed. And correctly designed system is always something that I pay attention to. That I want to bring you one example. About a year ago, maybe a little bit more, there was a cyber attack in the United States using Israel-made PLCs in the water business. And one morning I read this storage, and everybody say, wow, how it can happen? These people produced that PLC that suffered the attack. 5 o'clock in the morning, I wrote an article. Don't blame the PLC for cyber attack. It's not its role. The role of the PLC or RTU, whichever is being used, is to ensure a safe and reliable operation of the industrial process. That's its role. If you want to bring a better PLC that has that the programming is locked and you cannot easily modify it, that's fine. But on the other hand, I want to say it very clearly. When an attacker penetrates to the OT zone, it's game over. It doesn't really matter if you have a PLC type A or PLC type B, game over, because it's too late to do anything. If the attacker is a capable guy, he will do it in 2 minutes. If he didn't prepare himself, it may take him 15 minutes, but he will indeed have an impact on the operation reliability, safety. It will be outage, damage to equipment, risk to lives, and so on.
I can see some of your perspectives. I might not agree 100%, but that's okay. We don't have to agree 100%. The one thing I did want to bring up is when you mentioned the risk of a lack of understanding of base concepts. I think it's a valid point, but I think sitting here today, the reason I've taken some of my opinions of not fighting that battle anymore is because the language has been adopted by recognized standards. So there's now references where we can reference a NIST 882. We can reference, some of the language in terms from within the series of the 62443, right? So I don't necessarily agree that the premise that there's a complete lack of understanding of core concepts and things aren't being designed correctly. As an engineer and having engineered many of those systems, I probably have a different opinion there, Daniel.
Okay.
So, but
Perfect.
that's okay. That's okay, right? I think it's ultimately where I've kind of landed through my journey is it takes a village. And one of the things that I've realized about myself in my personal journey, I'm not always right. So, and as long as I'm in a constant state of learning, and I usually am, because that is my interest. If I'm not learning, I become bored. Before I started my career at Siemens in the late 90s, the longest period I had ever worked for a company was a couple of years, Daniel, honestly. And that was because in self-reflection, looking back, I'd get bored. And when I'm bored, my mind, I don't know, now I've learned that maybe it was ADD, but when I started my career at Siemens, one thing I can state in over 16 years, I was never bored. There was always challenges, even if I self-challenged myself in certain areas in technology. I enjoyed that. So I think that's part of my journey, is that constant state of learning. And now with the technology innovation now, wow, it's a playground.
I'm in the same position. Actually, I open my office at 6 o'clock in the morning and finish probably around 10 evening, and listen to about 3, 4 webinars and podcasts in a week. And I'm very active. If I think that I have an opinion, I just send a message to the speaker. I said, no, you need to correct it, because you are right. In order to create a situation that people accept our opinion, we need to adapt ourselves, need to be more flexible. I'm not always successful in that area, but at least I'm trying.
I understand it. And I think I used to be far more bullheaded, to use an American slang expression, and stubborn than I am today. So, for example, I emerged out of the engineering world where, it's the kind of the Star Wars, these are not the droids you're looking for when we would talk to IT. And at Siemens, as a vendor, as other vendors, we had products that would sit on DIN rail that looked like a PLC, but it was a PC actually running Windows, and each card that plugged into the back of that DIN rail was a DVI card for video and all, these different things, right? And why did we do that? Was it needed to be that PC at that certain layer? Or did we need an industrial PC, but we didn't want IT's involvement? And I think that's just kind of an interesting way to look at the world, because that was the world we had. Pre-Stuxnet, I would go in consulting, and I was in a systems engineering role. And anytime IT would come into the room and I was doing any type of whiteboarding, I instantly oh my, this is the enemy. And that was the mindset we had at that time. So in that immediate Stuxnet, I maintained those views, and that I would say where my personal journey has changed quite a bit. And that's where I realize now it takes a village. And one of the things I'll admit something, where another area where I was wrong, Daniel, coming out of Stuxnet, like so many others, knowing so much about different architectures and different verticals, it really impacted me personally, of kind of the fear factor and what I thought and predicted would be happening with an escalating, number of attacks. Hasn't really transpired the way I would have predicted. which is actually a good thing. But it's also it's helped me to understand the problem set to a certain extent of now everything is a balance in life. And when we look at securing these systems, operational technology, manufacturing site, any other site, it's another business function of that company. That and we need to not lose sight of what is the mission of that company. Now, if I'm a manufacturer, it's producing that product to my quality expectations and the number of product availability, ship it to a point of sale and sell it. If I'm generating power, it's to generate that power and distribute that power. If it's what, right? So that's the mission. Everything else that exists, it's all to support that mission.
I tell you, many times people ask me, okay, so how did you get to this activity? What are the main thinking that you need to bring to this industry? I always tell people, step number one is you need to understand the process, the physical process at your facility.
Yeah.
If you are in the water area, power production, chemical plants, or transportation, or any type of industrial physical utility operation, you need to understand the process. Second thing, you need to understand what can happen, some kind of business impact analysis, what can happen. And after you understand these two things, life will be much easier, because no one can distract you with different type of things. You said, I understand the process, I know what can happen, and I'm doing the right thing. When I decide to deploy a data diode, or deploy an IDS, or deploy a specific PLC or ID, I know why I'm doing it. And then I said, that's the basic for creating a safe and secured operation.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that, because you need to understand at that site level what is the critical processes, right? And then being able to map that ultimately down to the industrial control systems, because ultimately you have to understand what are the critical systems, what are hazardous, what are the impacts in terms of health, safety, environment, financial. Totally agree. In fact, I would, one thing that's really interesting between, if we think about a BIA, which is kind of like a base activity or process that feeds a couple of different related processes. So for example, within the enterprise, we think in terms of business continuity, right? So in order to define business continuity for some sites, what's interesting, to your point, you actually have to do that base business impact analysis. But one thing that's interesting to me, Daniel, is if you think about the term of operational resilience and business continuity are really far apart from each other. And what I mean by that is, from a business continuity where I've understood that BIA, and I have my site in, maybe it's in Berlin, right? And that Berlin factory is producing a product that is acting as a raw input at 10 other factories, right? So that's a critical risk. But from business continuity perspective, if I can offset that loss of production from that factory in Berlin by getting it from another friendly competitor or another source, then I've achieved business continuity, mission completed, move on. Now, let's pull this back to our world for just a moment. If our mission is to understand and achieve operational resilience, we still need that BIA to understand the processes and criticality. But now, if we want to achieve operational resilience, and my personal definition, this kind of goes back to your original premise of having the right terms. My definition of operational resilience is bend but don't break. So we might have an event that causes us with a slowdown of production or a temporary stoppage, but resilience allows us to recover, right? So if we're looking at this from a trend line, we can have that dip, but as long as we have that resilience. Now that resilience can be many forms of different redundancy. It can be the process redundancy, and that can be redundant piping, redundant valving, right? Like you have at a lot of different facilities. That's inherent engineered resilience and redundancy that we've built into that cyber physical system. But then there's the industrial control system of redundant controls.
It's interesting for new plants. Unfortunately, when we go to the legacy and we look at, I visited earlier this week a refinery and I looked at the architecture. I said, please explain to me 3 times why it was built that way, because somehow it doesn't fit to my thinking. And I tried to explain. I realized that it was built step by step with different people, different ideas, different innovation, and this was the result. The plant is working. If you ask me if it's well secured, I said, well, probably not the best. But then we are talking about my famous discussion of how do we define industrial attack? Because many people still struggle with that question. Some people say, if you ask how many attacks happened worldwide since the Stuxnet, you hear different opinions. And people don't have a good explanation why the opinions are so different. So I bravely wrote a definition that the industrial attack must be something that it's harming the industrial process, causing outage, damage, and risk to life of people. All the rest are something different.
So
and this creates a lot of discussion with people that I need to convince them why I have this view.
So let's dive into that. I think that's interesting to looking at in that perspective. So based upon your definition, if we have a loss of production, a shutdown of the control system, that would meet the term of a direct attack on the control system.
Well, need to look at the reason, because if there was an IT attack and the buyer, because of that, didn't purchase or didn't deliver the raw material, and because of that the plant stopped producing, then it's the IT attack. You cannot, some people say, listen, the plant stopped, I don't care, it's the OT attack. I said, no, because at the end of the day, we need to look at what happened and introduce corrective action. So if the buyer's computer was manipulated and the raw material didn't arrive, you call it an OT attack. I said, no, it's an IT attack that had indirect impact on the OT. So I wrote a paper that is published, correctly understanding ICS OT type incidents. And I said there are 4 types. One, which is purely an IT attack, not related to OT. An attack on the IT which have indirect influence on the OT, indirect impact. I don't like to call it, we include Colonial Pipeline in that because it's not belong to that area. Then if there is a attack on the OT through the IT, and then finally the Stuxnet, which is a direct OT attack. 4 types, and I tell people that's the way. Colonial Pipeline belongs to nowhere because it was a pure IT attack, and the reason why the OT was shut down, it was a management decision. I would like to say bravely, not a very good decision.
Well, so this is where I would have to respectfully disagree.
Okay.
And let me quantify that a little bit, Daniel, because my view used to align with your view 100%. And again, I think it's maybe some of the personal journey that I've taken where I have started to evolve or change my thinking of it. Because if we go back to the mission of that company. If you want to take pipeline, or if you want to take any, it is to produce that product and distribute that product to a point of sale. If you disrupt that mission, was that mission disrupted? I think how I used to view the world is strictly through that lens of a direct industrial control system attack. And I think that's dangerous thinking now, in my opinion. And how I rationalize this is, for example, if you pull up the last, I believe this is accurate. You have to look at this, but if you pull up the last 12 to 18 months worth of data on ransomware that directly impacted manufacturing, and directly impacted, let me quantify that definition there. If production was lost because of that ransomware attack, 75% of that was or greater was on the IT systems.
99% for 9.
Okay. Hold on for a moment. It's the rationale here. So the idea then is, was the mission impacted? Yes or no, right? If we stick within that thinking of that hard, rigid thought process of containerizing direct, here's the danger. When we're looking at our expert community going to do an assessment at the site, what this implies then is we're looking at only that industrial DMZ at a level 3.5 down. Anything out? No, we're not considering that. But if you consider that the most likely attack causing a loss of our mission, we have to address that. And that is mission critical to the business, whether it's on the carpeted side of the house or the concrete side of the house. That's where I've evolved my thinking, because risk to the business is risk to the business. Now, the impact is that impact related to health, safety, environment, financial, reputation. You have to consider everything, and we can't look at things through that singular lens. That's my personal opinion and how I see things now.
Yes, Roger. But let's go back to the Colonia, because this is so interesting. I say, if the organization would make a decision, we continue to supply the gas to all the stations. We will charge them 2 weeks later based on the average, any kind of average consumption which they are buying. It would make the gas stations 100 times more happier than to have accurate billing, but a week later, when for a whole week they didn't get gas. In your home, you wouldn't agree not to have water because the IT department is under a retrofit. You said, okay, I don't care. You supply to me water, charge me based on what you understand, but you supply the water, and this is what many people, I believe, according to my view, didn't view it correctly. Business operation continuity is the second most important role of us as expert after safety. First of all, safety first. Second, business operation continuity. Maybe if they will charge me according to average, maybe I lose a little bit, maybe I gain a little bit. I don't care. It's small money compared to the loss of full week of not working.
I think that's one way of looking at it. I think it might be an oversimplified way of looking at it, Daniel, if you don't mind me saying so, because what you're relating really a goodwill type of thinking. It wasn't as simple as just transporting the fuel to the stations. To give an analogy, it's like a large Amazon distribution center where you're rolled out thousands of Amazon trucks, but you have no delivery information. With that logic, we're saying, roll the trucks anyway. As long as people are getting something, we'll figure it out later. It doesn't really work. That's too far.
I know. It was.
No, it's actually there's a challenge. So I think the imperative here is we have to look at the impact to the mission, because it's mission oriented. And I think when we start to look at the problem set through that lens, well, now we have to have different stakeholders involved to address that problem, because now it goes beyond just our little closed ecosystem community of the industrial control system and the process control engineers solving this problem of this, industrial facility. Now we have to understand and break through these communication silos. And this is where I've kind of evolved in my thinking now to really address the risk to the mission. And that's where it takes a village. So when I'm helping an organization that's early in their journey, Daniel, one of the first things that I really recommend is building that first, whether we want to call it a corporate advisory board or, it's a tiger team, but we have to have personnel from IT and OT to really understand the full problem set because it's a problem at the mission level.
Collaborate.
It takes a village. And this is where I probably evolved in some of that. And this is where, if I were to take a step back, Daniel, here's how I view the problem set with operational technology security. And that is, it's a cross-domain problem set that is so unique versus the enterprise, right? So generally speaking, when we think about information security, right? Information security for the organization, it started with applying security controls on assets that were owned by that same organization, right? IT owned those assets, whether PCs or servers. Well, then we introduced the complexities of the cloud. Well, now we had much more digital-based assets, right? But still the same premise, same domain. Now with operations reports through a completely different thread. Sometimes in manufacturing, we see this new emerging role of chief manufacturing officer, but ultimately operations typically flows up through that COO, that chief operations officer, right? And generally speaking, that CISO, is reporting through CIO or legal. The challenge is when we're looking at operational technology, and this is another area in the early days that I was wrong, Daniel. I never thought the CISO would own security because I had that hard-coded view of IT versus OT, right? I think now the evidence is there. I think we can safely say the CISO is winning that battle of being responsible, right?
Yes, absolutely. One CISO for all. Yes.
The challenge that CISO has, though, is not having ownership of those assets. These are assets belonging to the operations. So that's a very challenging problem. You mentioned, the IT-OT convergence. Well, I think another term for that, whether we want to think industry 4.0, 5.0, or just digitalization initiatives. If Stuxnet, not Stuxnet in this case, if COVID taught us anything, was the critical nature of our global supply chains, right?
Absolutely.
And how global our supply chains are. And part of that is, in order to be competitive now as any type of a manufacturer, that's using operational technology, it's really, you have to make your decisions quicker. And I think most digitalization initiatives are introducing the ability to make more effective decisions closer to the plant floor so that you can really just move at the speed of information. Organizations are doing that in order to become effective and competitive. So this is the challenging environment we have now.
Yes, if you wish, I would like really to raise another topic, which is the term, the OT ransomware. Many people say OT ransomware, the biggest problem. And I published about, I don't know if you had a chance to see it, I published a paper, OT ransomware is not likely to happen. Like this, I published it in different media, and I expected an hour later to receive many phone calls. Daniel, what happened to you? And I said, everyone, give me 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I convince you why OT ransomware is not likely to happen. So let's dedicate a few minutes to that, because when people think ransomware, they think about a cyber attack. And I say, no, ransomware is first of all a hostile action to take the money. So why I'm claiming that OT ransomware is not likely to happen? Because let's say that on one morning you come to the control room and you get the beautiful red screen, black screen, we encrypted all your data and your plant is no longer operational. Later, somebody is suggesting you to buy the decrypting key, and I say I can buy it for $1, $2, and throw it to the garbage. And people say, "Wow, why you are saying that? It's unusual." And I say, "Okay, let's assume that our system PLC HMI was encrypted, and now I am asking you to sign on a white paper sheet. I sign that I guarantee that after decrypting the SCADA system with the key that I purchased from the attacker, the system will return to operational safety and reliability." And people say, no, we are not going to sign it. Okay, great. So if you are not signing that you are sure, why would you pay for the decryption key? And this is the reason why we not see OT ransomware, and I bravely say not likely to happen. I'm not saying some mistake, some attacker who is not experienced, some attacker who is not aware of the thinking of experts. He may do that, but in general, it's not going to be a big issue. What's your view on that?
Completely different opinion.
Okay.
Again, it goes back to this new view of mission-oriented, right? Now, having been a long-time software developer, I'm going to let the world know one piece of insightful information about software developers. We're lazy. Let me quantify that. What I mean by that is you're not going to develop something that you don't need to develop, right? So an attacker, and even when I was doing offensive security demonstrations, if I can affect the mission. Now, what is my mission as a ransomware gang? Ransomware as a service, right? As that affiliate, my goal is to achieve the highest likelihood of payment for a target. Now, if I'm targeting manufacturing as an example, and listen, there's plenty of studies where you can look at number one or number two. What my point is, you don't need to get to the process control network or below, because of the interconnected nature of how operational systems actually run. It's not just the control system. The control system,
yeah,
and this is coming from someone who has designed every single element within a control system. It's the local IT supporting systems, right? It's my raw material supply. There's so many different necessary, especially for global organizations, interconnected systems, that if I can perform the reconnaissance to truly understand these interconnections and these indirect impacts, where it's not the ones and zeros going beyond for those IT systems into the IDMZ and below, it's the indirect. Why would I, if I can accomplish my mission?
Yes, but finally, I hear this explanation for many people, which is correct. I accept it. Sometimes I'm trying to be accurate and well focused. That I said, well, am I authorized to sign that I ensure operation safety by the decrypting key? I said, no, I'm not authorized. The only thing I'm authorized to do is to reinstall the system from a golden image or any type of reliable system, reliable source, hoping that the system will return to normal. Maybe even if there will be problems, but that's what I'm authorized to do. I don't like to see a situation that the machinery will be damaged, or in worst case, some people get hurt because the decrypted PLC was not perfectly operating. Then I said, Daniel, why you did it? I said, I don't know. Usually we pay few bitcoins and we get the decryption key. No, so I want to make it very clearly to people. That's my view, and the people should decide. I can
I
accept that you
understand
have
your
a
view.
different view.
I can understand your view, Daniel. But hey, listen, I think this is, I love these type of conversations where it's not about trying to convince one side of another idea or thought process, but it's about sharing of ideas.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's how we improve any type of situation, whether it's technical or otherwise. Daniel, it's been a real pleasure. Great to talk to you again. Really enjoyed this conversation, and I really think some of our listeners are going to enjoy some of these perspectives that were shared, and would welcome the opportunity to have you back.
Sure. Thank you very much. And any of the listeners would like to send me an email via LinkedIn and agree or disagree, no worry about it. I accept it, and I spend any number of hours which is needed to reply to everyone, not because I say I'm right, because I feel that sharing the knowledge is important, and this will make us stronger together.
Agreed. Agreed. Like I said, I love sharing the ideas. Thanks again, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy days to join us on this latest episode. Have a great day.